In 1980, a team of hikers stumbled upon something impossible. High on the frozen peaks of the Italian Alps, the melting edge of a glacier revealed a shape, metallic, armored, and impossibly intact. Inside, 3 men still sat in their positions, uniforms untouched by time, their faces frozen mid-expression. Their tank was sealed in perfect condition, as if they had just stopped for a rest 36 years ago. Who were they? What happened to them in 1944? And why did no one ever find them, until the glacier gave them back? Before going into this chilling mystery of time, make sure to support this channel. Hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss more true mysteries like this one. Your support truly keeps stories like these alive. Now, let's travel back to the final winter of World War II, and uncover what happened to Sergeant Leon Kruger and his missing tank crew. It was December 1944, one of the coldest winters Europe had seen in decades. The war was deep in its final phase, but for the men on the front lines, that truth was hard to believe. Snow buried entire valleys, and the mountains near the Austrian-Italian border became both fortress and graveyard. Sergeant Leon Kruger, aged 29, commanded a Panther tank belonging to the 2nd Panzer Regiment. With him were his 2 closest friends, Corporal Dieter Hoffmann, the gunner, and Private Karl Weiss, the driver. They'd been together since training, bonded by years of shared fear and laughter inside the cramped steel belly of their machine, the Iron Ghost, as they called it. Their orders came abruptly. Move through a mountain pass near Monte Scuro, an isolated sector known for avalanches and sudden storms. Their task sounded simple: deliver supplies to an observation unit at the next valley. But even the veterans felt something off about this mission. The coordinates seemed mismatched, the radio instructions brief and oddly coded. Still, they obeyed. At dawn, the tank rumbled up the narrow mountain road. The snow was already piling knee-deep, and the engine growled as Karl kept steady control. Inside, Leon kept a hand on the radio knob. Static, faint voices, then silence. By afternoon, a blizzard swept in from the north. The wind howled like artillery. Visibility dropped to near zero. Dieter swore under his breath. If command wanted us dead, they could have just sent us to the front. Leon forced a grin but said nothing. The compass spun erratically. Radio contact was lost completely. As night fell, the blizzard became a white curtain, and somewhere along that twisting road, the Iron Ghost and its 3 crewmen vanished from the face of the earth. The storm lasted for nearly 3 days. By the time it cleared, half the mountain range was buried under meters of snow. Communication lines were down, trails erased, and entire patrols stranded. In the chaos of retreat and redeployment, one missing tank crew meant little to headquarters. A brief entry appeared in the regimental log. Vehicle 204, last reported near Monte Scuro, presumed lost to weather or mechanical failure. And that was it. No rescue mission, no follow-up. Just a name crossed out in ink. Kruger, Leon. Status: missing in action. But back in Munich, Leon's wife, Anneliese, refused to accept that. Each week she went to the local post office, waiting for a letter that never came. In early 1945, she received an official notice stamped in cold black ink. We regret to inform you that Sergeant Leon Kruger has been declared missing, presumed dead. Anneliese kept that letter folded neatly in her prayer book. She didn't know that her husband, and the 2 men he called brothers, were lying only a few hundred kilometers away, encased in ice, waiting for history to thaw. In the years after the war, the region of Monte Scuro became quiet again. Farmers returned. Trails reopened. The burned-out wrecks of tanks and trucks were pulled from ravines, their steel skeletons rusting beside streams. But of Kruger's Panther, there was no trace. Some locals whispered stories of a ghost engine heard rumbling through the valleys on misty nights. A shepherd claimed he once saw faint headlights moving slowly through the fog, but when he approached, there was nothing there. In the 1950s, mountaineers rediscovered the Skuro Pass, turning it into a dangerous but scenic climbing route. Several groups reported finding odd metal fragments high up the glacier's edge, thick, painted steel, unlike anything from civilian machinery. But in those post-war years, relics from the conflict were everywhere. No one thought much of it. By the late 1960s, even those fragments had been swallowed again by ice and time. In 1978, 34 years after the disappearance, a young historian named Dr. Matteo Rossi began researching wartime losses in northern Italy. He had grown up hearing his grandfather, a partisan fighter, talk about German tanks that had vanished during the final retreat. Rossi found himself obsessed with one record. Vehicle 204, last position, Monte Scuro sector, December 1944. Crew of 3. Never recovered. Something about the brevity of the report felt wrong. Why was there no recovery attempt? Why no final coordinates or post-war investigation? He traveled to the small alpine village of Valteria, where old locals remembered the sound of tanks in the mountains that winter. An 86-year-old man named Giovanni Moretti, once a shepherd, recalled a moment that never left him. "It was around Christmas," he said. "I saw smoke on the ridge, black smoke. Then a noise, like thunder, and it stopped. For weeks, no one could go up there. Snow kept falling. When spring came, the ridge had changed. A whole part of it gone." Matteo made notes, cross-referencing old topographic maps. He marked the area where Giovanni pointed, a section of the Montanaro Glacier, now mostly inaccessible. Something inside him whispered, "That's where they are." In August 1980, Matteo joined a small group of climbers exploring the same ridge. It was an unusually warm summer, and the glacier had retreated several meters for the first time in decades. 4 hours, they climbed through slush and meltwater, their boots crunching on brittle ice. Then one of the climbers, a Swiss mountaineer named Eric Lenz, stopped. "Matteo, there's something under the ice." At first, it looked like rock, smooth, gray, and round. But as they cleared the snow, a metallic gleam caught the sunlight. Then came the edges of a hatch. Rivets. A section of tread. They'd found a tank. Frozen solid, its turret half buried, the barrel pointed upward toward the sky as if frozen mid-battle. The insignia was faint but still visible beneath the frost, a black iron cross, the mark of the Wehrmacht. The glacier had preserved it like a museum piece. Even the rubber on the treads remained uncracked. And through the frosted glass of the driver's viewport, a human silhouette. The authorities were alerted immediately. Within days, a joint recovery operation between the Italian Alpine Corps and local police began. News crews arrived, though most were kept at a distance. When the vehicle was finally opened, the rescuers expected only bones. Instead, they found something far stranger. Inside sat 3 figures, fully preserved, still in uniform. The interior air was dry and faintly oily, smelling of rust and leather. One man still held a small photograph of a woman, her smile frozen as clearly as his own. Another had a cigarette between his fingers, unlit. The logbook was still inside the turret compartment, sealed in a metal box. When opened, its last entry read, "Visibility 0. Compass malfunctioning. Attempting descent toward pass. Engine temp dropping. No contact." December 17th, 1944. The next page was blank. News spread like wildfire across Europe. Headlines read, Frozen time capsule from World War II found in Italian Alps. Glacier reveals vanished tank crew after 36 years. But not everyone wanted the full story told. The recovery team noted strange inconsistencies. The tank's radio had been tampered with internally. The fuel system showed signs of manual sabotage. And strangest of all, the turret hatch had been locked from the outside. Who sealed them in? And why had command been so quick to erase their report? The recovery site at Montenero Glacier quickly became one of the most heavily guarded areas in the Alps that summer. Italian authorities, military historians, journalists, and even NATO liaisons arrived to witness what many were calling the most well-preserved World War II relic ever found. But for Dr. Matteo Rossi, the historian who had led the team to the site, this discovery was more than archaeology. It was vindication and a haunting responsibility. For 36 years, these men had been ghosts, forgotten by both sides of history. Now, they were back, untouched by time, as if demanding the world remember. It took nearly 5 days to extract the tank completely from the ice. Technicians used heated air cannons and insulated tarps to melt sections carefully, while preserving the integrity of the vehicle. Every melted layer revealed new details, the camouflage paint still crisp beneath frost, the serial markings legible, the machine gun barrel unbent. When they finally lifted the hatch, a still silence fell over everyone present. Inside, it was as if the war had never ended. 3 men sat in their battle stations, skin pale but intact, like figures in a wax museum. The first, Sergeant Leon Kruger, was in the commander's seat, his eyes closed, head tilted slightly downward. Corporal Dieter Hoffmann, the gunner, was frozen mid-turn, one hand resting on the traverse wheel. Private Karl Weiss, the driver, sat slumped forward over the controls. Even their uniforms were recognizable, medals, insignia, and name tags, perfectly preserved. Their watches had stopped at 4:27. Experts determined that this was likely the moment the tank was sealed inside the ice, December 17, 1944. Forensic teams transferred the bodies to a nearby military lab in Bolzano. Tests confirmed something astonishing. The men had not died from freezing. There were no external wounds. And the oxygen levels inside the tank suggested they had been alive for several hours after being sealed in. Cause of death: asphyxiation. Someone had sealed the hatch, disabled the ventilation, and left them to die in silence. Further examination of the tank revealed even darker details. The radio wires had been deliberately cut, not by damage or age. The engine's coolant lines were drained, ensuring it would overheat and fail in deep cold. A small inscription was etched inside the driver's hatch door, faint, almost invisible. "Wir wurden verraten." We were betrayed. It was enough to turn a historical recovery into a full-scale investigation. Dr. Rossi couldn't shake the feeling that he had stepped into something much larger than an archaeological discovery. Late at night, he sat in his mountain cabin, reading through declassified German military archives. There, buried in a 1945 report, he found it, a memo marked High Confidential. It referenced Operation Schneegeist, Snow Ghost, a last-ditch plan by the Wehrmacht to relocate stolen art and gold reserves through the Alps before Allied troops arrived. The note listed several vehicles assigned to the convoy. Among them, Panther Tank No. 204, Transport Unit 9, Sergeant L. Kruger, Command. But here was the catch. Kruger's tank had not been assigned to combat duty at all. It was part of a logistics detail. The implication was chilling. His tank was carrying more than ammunition. In early September 1980, after permission was granted by both Italian and German authorities, Matteo oversaw the opening of the tank's rear compartment. the section once used to store shells and equipment. What they found would rewrite everything. Beneath the floor plates, wrapped in decayed canvas and oilcloth, lay wooden crates stamped with old Reich markings. Inside were dozens of small lead-sealed containers filled with documents, sealed envelopes, and fragments of what appeared to be art restoration papers. One contained golden jewelry, another silver coins, each marked with identification numbers later linked to Jewish families deported from Austria in 1943. The discovery was horrifying. The tank had been part of a covert smuggling mission, ordered to transport looted valuables through the Alps for safekeeping. But something went wrong. Maybe Kruger and his men realized what they were carrying. Maybe they refused to continue. Or maybe someone decided to silence them before they could talk. Whatever happened, they had been left there, sealed alive, entombed with the very treasures they might have tried to protect or expose. Investigators confirmed through metallurgical testing that the turret hatch had been welded shut from the outside using a portable torch, an unusual practice in wartime, especially under blizzard conditions. There were traces of fuel residue and torch slag on the surrounding armor, suggesting the act was intentional and executed by someone with access to maintenance equipment. Matteo was stunned. Only another tank unit or maintenance crew could have had the tools to do that. He cross-referenced the convoy manifest and found one more entry. Vehicle 205, Oberleutnant Reinhard Voss. Voss's unit was recorded as having lost contact shortly after Kruger's disappearance, but there was never confirmation of destruction or recovery. Voss himself had survived the war, lived quietly in Bremen, and died in 1971. His personal memoirs, published posthumously, included a chilling sentence that historians had long ignored. In winter, the mountain keeps its secrets well. Some ghosts deserve to stay buried. As the investigation continued, stories began to resurface among the locals. Elderly villagers recalled seeing strange military trucks near the glacier just days after the 1944 blizzard, men in gray coats, working by torchlight. Then they vanished. Others spoke of a rumor that circulated in the 1950s, of an entire tank buried under ice, holding Nazi treasure, though no one had ever proven it. Now, it was real. But what chilled Matteo most wasn't the discovery itself, it was what came next. Within weeks, military officials ordered all contents of the tank confiscated and sealed under international custody. Reporters were told to stop calling it a crime. The official statement labeled it an unfortunate wartime loss. And just like that, the truth was buried again, only this time not under ice, but under paperwork. Weeks later, as Matteo sorted through recovered artifacts, he found something the military had overlooked, a folded, yellowed envelope inside the commander's jacket pocket. It was addressed in faded ink. "An mean Juliet Anneliese. To my beloved Anneliese." The paper inside was dated December 16, 1944, one day before their disappearance. "If this letter ever finds you, know that I tried to do what was right. They told us this mission was for the fatherland, but it feels wrong. I fear we are being led somewhere not meant for us to return. Tell our son that his father loved him. Tell him the mountains remember everything. Leon." Matteo read it in silence, the words trembling in his hands. He realized then that Leon hadn't vanished in a storm. He'd been buried by betrayal, trapped by history itself. By autumn of 1980, the tank, still remarkably intact, was transported to a secure facility near Innsbruck, Austria. It remains there to this day, partially preserved behind glass, known unofficially as the Glacier Ghost. Visitors who stand before it often describe an eerie stillness, as though the machine still carries the weight of its crew's final breath. And sometimes, when the air conditioning hums through the exhibit, it sounds faintly like an engine turning over, a ghost waking in the cold. The snow returned to the Montenero region in late November 1980, covering the tracks of men and machines once again. By then, the story of the frozen tank crew had faded from headlines. Governments had issued their reports, museums had taken their artifacts, and the official narrative was neatly wrapped in diplomatic language. An extraordinary discovery of historical importance. The soldiers perished due to extreme weather conditions while performing routine duties. But Matteo Rossi knew that was a lie. The recovered letters, crates, and photographs disappeared into archives marked restricted access. Even requests under the Freedom of Information Act were denied. When Matteo pressed for further investigation, he was politely told to let the dead rest. A senior officer from the German Federal Archives even visited him in person, warning him that some histories are better left unspoken. Still, Matteo persisted. He published a paper in 1981 titled The Glacier Ghost, a study of wartime disappearance and recovery. The academic version contained only what the authorities permitted: geographical data, climatological effects, and a timeline of discovery. But his private notes told the story that official records refused to acknowledge. That 3 men had been deliberately sealed alive to hide a war crime. And that their bodies, preserved by nature, were proof of something far darker than anyone wanted remembered. In 1983, 3 years after the discovery, Matteo received a letter without a return address. Inside was a single page, typed on an old typewriter, in German. I served under Oberleutnant Reinhard Voss. I know what happened to the crew of Panther 204. They refused to carry the cargo. Voss ordered them confined until further instruction. The storm came sooner than expected. He sealed them himself, believing rescue would come. It never did. At the bottom was one line handwritten in ink. He told me before he died, the guilt followed him all his life. Matteo stared at the letter for hours. The final words echoed endlessly. The guilt followed him all his life. So Voss hadn't meant for them to die, or so he told himself. But in war, intention often dies long before the men do. Later that year, an old woman arrived at the Innsbruck Museum. Her name was Anneliese Kruger, now in her late 60s. She had traveled from Munich after hearing of the discovery on a local radio program. The museum staff closed the hall for her visit. When she stood before the tank, she didn't cry. She simply placed her hand on the cold glass, as though touching Leon through time. I used to dream he'd come home, she whispered. But now I see. He never really left. He just waited for me to find him. She stayed there for a long time, her hand never moving. Then she removed a small silver cross from her neck and pressed it against the glass. You can rest now, mein Lieber. The mountain kept its promise. That moment would be remembered by the curator as one of the most hauntingly silent moments in the museum's history. Even the hum of the lights seemed to fade, as though the room itself was holding its breath. Years passed. The story was retold countless times, in documentaries, war journals, and late-night programs. But Matteo never stopped wondering about the last missing piece. Why was Kruger's crew chosen for the mission in the first place? In 1994, as more German military documents were finally declassified, Matteo found a shocking entry in a logistics order list for Operation Schneegeist. Crew 204 recommended for transit mission due to exemplary loyalty and prior refusal to follow unauthorized orders. That line stopped him cold. It meant Kruger's crew had a reputation for questioning illegal orders, the very kind of soldiers command might want to silence quietly. Their inclusion in the convoy had been deliberate. Their route through Monte Scuro wasn't a coincidence. They were sent there not because they were trusted, but because they weren't. By the early 2000s, global warming began melting alpine glaciers faster than ever. Hikers again reported seeing fragments of wartime relics, helmets, ration tins, pieces of old uniforms emerging from the ice. Nature, it seemed, was releasing its memories one by one. One summer, Matteo returned to Montenero alone. The glacier where he had once stood with the climbers was now half its original size. He climbed to the ridge and found a single track, a faint indentation in the ice, like a tread mark, slowly vanishing under sunlight. He sat there in silence, holding Leon's recovered letter in his hand, now laminated and yellowed. For a moment, he thought he could hear an engine humming faintly beneath the glacier, echoing across decades, the iron ghost still trying to move, still trying to finish its journey. War doesn't just bury bodies, Matteo later wrote. It buries truth, love, and names. But time is patient, and the earth remembers. The glacier kept them safe, not as soldiers, but as men who tried to do what was right. It took 36 years for the mountain to return them. It may take a lifetime for us to understand why. The preserved Panther tank remains displayed under controlled temperature, a silent monument to frozen time. Visitors often report feeling watched when standing beside it, a presence, a pressure, something beyond history. Perhaps it's the weight of guilt, or maybe it's simply the soul of 3 men who never made it home. What's undeniable is this. The mountain that hid them for decades eventually spoke, not with words, but with ice cracking, revealing what humanity tried to forget. And within that silence, the world was forced to remember that truth never really dies. It just waits, frozen, until someone dares to look. And that's the story of Sergeant Leon Kruger, Corporal Dieter Hoffmann, and Private Carl Weiss. 3 tank crewmen who vanished without a trace in 1944, only to be found decades later, perfectly preserved by the glacier that refused to forget them. It's a chilling reminder that even in war, nature becomes the final witness, and sometimes the only one willing to tell the truth. If you found this story powerful, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. Because we have many more mysteries of history waiting to be uncovered. And remember, some stories don't end when we stop looking. They end when the earth decides to reveal them.